Decentralization is the unique selling point of crypto, and it is decentralization that assures that rules are respected, that the playground is leveled, and that each individual has enough power and incentives to make others accountable and to stop bad actors from thriving in a decentralized environment. As such, decentralization is responsible to increase the security and the fairness of blockchain networks, and it's what actually allows you to trust the blockchain enough for you to feel comfortable storing your wealth there. However, what is actually decentralization? How can we measure decentralization and make sure that the blockchain is secure and that we are using the best blockchains possible? Well, to that I can say that there's an independent index being created to measure decentralization, and in this video I'll explain you everything you need to know. Let's start maybe by trying to explain what is decentralization and how complex it actually is to measure decentralization in the context of blockchain and cryptocurrency, because it's hard to find a simple definition for decentralization. But trying to keep it simple, I would say that decentralization is the process of distributing power to an increasingly large number of entities or individuals. And in blockchain, this is done by the transfer of power to a distributed network of individuals, of actors. And the advantage of decentralization is that it makes networks more resilient. For example, if you have a blockchain and if a few elements that are running this blockchain go down or stop executing their functions, the network will keep on running because it is decentralized and because other individuals are still delivering and doing the necessary work for the network to continue operating as it should. And decentralization actually implies a division of power, where if some of the individuals or entities start acting rogue, start acting badly or in an unfair way, the other individual members of the network actually have the power and the incentives to punish that behavior and to ensure that everyone behaves in the right way and that the right behavior is actually the one that gets rewarded. As such, the more decentralized a network is, the harder it is to be attacked, corrupt, and fail, because there is no single point of failure, and having a bunch of nodes keeps everyone honest. However, there are a lot of nuances when we try to define decentralization, especially in the blockchain and the cryptocurrency context, because there are really so many areas to consider, so many areas that make up a blockchain, and ideally all these areas should be decentralized. For example, a blockchain can be decentralized at the consensus level, but not be decentralized in terms of decision making. Or it could be decentralized in terms of individuals validating transactions, but be very centralized in terms of data storage. Or, for example, it could be decentralized in terms of infrastructure, but be centralized considering the distribution of tokens, or even considering the developments, the technological developments required for the blockchain to keep on growing. And so this is just an example for you to see all the areas we need to consider when taking a look at blockchain decentralization. And why is this important? Is that centralization causes issues, causes concerns, because it gives too much power for a few individuals that can have an unfair advantage or make decisions that don't benefit the community, or that actually hurt some people or hurt their wealth and their financial power in any way. In addition to that, it generates single points of failure, points where it's easier to attack the blockchain, to try to bring it down, or to try to deliver some kind of specific agenda, especially when attacking the blockchain can bring to individuals some type of economical benefit. It's very dangerous. And decentralization really increases the security on that aspect. However, I would say it's not clear these days how we can measure decentralization, because there is no complete metric to do so. There are only a few metrics that focus on very specific areas and don't give you a notion of the bigger picture. Metrics such as the Nakamoto coefficient, which is very useful on a specific aspect, but not useful considering the broader picture. Especially because I like to think that, a blockchain is as decentralized as its less decentralized metric. So it's important to try to optimize for all these metrics and not for just a few. So this is something that is clearly missing in this space, this complete metric, and it's something that could be extremely useful for users of cryptocurrency and blockchain that do care about the principles that started this revolution and want their funds and value to be in blockchains that are as safe as possible, as decentralized as possible, and as resilient as possible to third entities, to external entities, and to control, basically. But more than that, it can also be extremely useful in terms of helping provide some regulatory clarity for many projects. For example, such a measure, as long as independent and scientifically backed, could also play a crucial role in building arguments for projects to define which blockchains are actually considered sufficiently decentralized and as such shouldn't be considered securities. Fortunately, today we are going to show you a complete metric that is not yet ready but that is currently in development to measure decentralization in blockchain considering all these dimensions. And I'm talking about an index that has already developed some interesting metrics. So you do have already some work live, some conclusions that you can take, even though a lot of work is being developed still. And these metrics focus on different blockchains and is taking a very scientific approach. And for those of you who are not aware of it, I'm talking about the EDI, the Edinburgh Decentralization Index. And this is an independent index that is basically developed by scholars by the University of Edinburgh. And even though it's being partially funded by IOG, one of the founding entities of Cardano. So how will the EDI work? Basically, it will take different metrics from different crucial areas of blockchain technology, such as information, network resilience, or consensus. And each metric will have a weight and they will be merged into a single index that will represent the overall decentralization of the blockchain, considering all those areas. This should allow for an easy but fair comparison of blockchains, both in terms of the overall decentralization through this index, or in terms of specific metrics that are also made available, as the EDI will be an open source index. Everyone can see what's being done there and how is it being done. And now let's take a look here at what the EDI has achieved in terms of progress. Here you have the dashboard, and we can see already here some of the metrics they have developed in terms of consensus mechanism of blockchains and checking the decentralization in the consensus metrics, and that they are also currently developing metrics related to tokenomics, as you can see here. And in the menu here on the left side, you can also check the code that has been developed to create these metrics. As everything is open source, you can see here the documentation for you to understand the reasoning behind what's being built and how it all works. But currently, as only consensus has been developed and made available, there is only code and documentation for this specific part of the Edinburgh Decentralization Index. And now let's dive deeper into the available metrics and actually evaluate what has been developed so far. And if you're enjoying the process of learning more about decentralization, if you think that this is important, please leave a like and subscribe, because we do care a lot about decentralization in this channel. That's where the name came from. As you can see here, we have a couple of consensus-related metrics that we are going to go over. We have metrics for at least 7 blockchains. And in the future, I know that the team does intend to add more blockchains into the EDI so it can become a more useful and complete metric. And the first metric that is analyzed here is actually the Nakamoto coefficient, that basically measures the minimum number of entities necessary to control more than 50% of mining or staking power, depending on whether the blockchain is proof of stake or proof of work. And basically, this is an important metric that analyzes how many entities you need to control to carry a 50% attack, the 51% attack, because it's said that if you have over 51% of the blockchain under your control, you can actually attack the blockchain, make the rules, change things for your benefit. So it's a very important risk to consider and to avoid. For this metric, we can see here that clearly Cardano seems to be the outlier and the winner here with 58 entities at least that need to be controlled for 51%. The second best is surprisingly Tezos, and for example, Bitcoin here only has two entities. Two entities are enough due to all the pool mining that has centralized the network into these pools that are controlled by the same management. While for Ethereum, two entities are also enough. Now that the change to proof of stake also seem to centralize a little bit the network, especially now with liquid staking and Lido having so much power. Then we have here the Gini coefficient that analyzes the degree of inequality in block production. So the closer to zero, the more similar is the number of blocks that different entities produce. The closer to one, the more blocks a single entity produces, so the more control it has over what goes into the blockchain. And we can see here that in these metrics, most blockchains are performing really poorly, with the majorities of blocks being produced by the same entities. Still, the ones that performed better were Cardano, followed by Tezos and Bitcoin, meaning that those are still the ones that have more decentralized block production. Then we actually have the Shannon entropy that represents the expected amount of information in the distribution of blocks across entities. So it's related to the way information is spread and made available across the different entities, and a higher value of entropy indicates a higher decentralization and a lower predictability. Cardano here presents again as the most decentralized blockchain in this metric, followed by Tezos and Bitcoin Cash. A curious fact is that Bitcoin in this metric has a lower value than Ethereum. Moving forward, we have here the Hirschman Index. Well, that's a name that is hard not to butcher, I would say, but this index basically measures market concentration and is being used here to measure the concentration of block production in the blockchain. Numbers close to zero mean that many entities produce a similar number of blocks, while higher numbers means that one entity produces most or all of the blocks. And this index here varies between 0 and 10,000. And the US Department of Justice has set the following values to interpret this metric in traditional markets. You know, from 0 to 1500, the market is considered to be competitive. From 1500 to 2500 is more directly concentrated market, and above 2500 is highly concentrated. And of course, it's important to note there is no official threshold for block production or for cryptocurrencies. And here in this metric, you can see Cardano followed by Tezos and Bitcoin Cash as the most competitive and decentralized performers in this metric. It's interesting to see the change of Cardano and Tezos here in the graph that were highly centralized, as you can see here, and to move to become the most decentralized in this metric. You know, for Cardano, for example, the blocks were initially only produced by the founding entities, so that explains decentralization here. But with Shelley upgrade, the block production was decentralized onto the community, and this metric has improved a lot since then. And considering the metrics shared by the US Department of Justice, if we would try to see the competitiveness in terms of block production in these blockchains, the three blockchains that we mentioned as the best are the only ones that fit in the competitive market classification, while the others are moderately concentrated. And from the blockchains analyzed here, there is none that is highly concentrated, which is already very positive, I would say. Then we have here the Theil index, another measure of entropy, or in other words, an assessment of the level of uncertainty and randomness. And this metric basically aims to capture the lack of diversity or redundancy in a population. In this case, entities related with block production and the consensus of blockchain technologies. Values close to zero indicate equality, and values towards infinity indicate inequality. And in the years of decentralization, we want as much equality as possible to assure equal powers to individuals. And I value basically indicates that we have more concentration. Here Cardano is again the best performer, followed by Bitcoin and Tezos, which have extremely close values to each other. And curiously, the most centralized blockchain in terms of this metric seems to be Ethereum. Moving on to the max power ratio, which is a metric that represents the share of blocks that are produced by the most powerful entity. And with most powerful entity, we mean the entity that produces the most blocks. And the output of this metric is between 0 and 1. And the lower the metric, the more decentralized the blockchain actually is. And here the big winner is blockchain with a surprising result of 0, followed by Cardano, Tezos, Dogecoin, and Ethereum. Finally, as the last metric to be analyzed, we have the Theil Decentralization Index. In this case, this index represents the minimum number of entities that collectively control more of 60% of the mining power or staking power of the blockchains here analyzed. And in this index, Cardano seems to be by far the blockchain with the highest decentralization for this metric, with at least 118 entities that you need to control to have more than 66% of the stake, followed by Tezos in second place, where you only need to control 18 entities. And for Bitcoin, you need to control around 4 to 5 entities, and for Ethereum, 5 to 3 entities. I believe there is a lot to be learned from this EDI analysis, and that it is actually good to have this kind of decentralization metrics that keep us honest and that keep us aware of how decentralization is in each level of the blockchain. In addition, these metrics can also be great for companies because they can develop to try to optimize in terms of decentralization and not just speed, which is the direction we seem to be growing. And to be honest, this direction I don't feel is the right one, because for speed you have decentralized systems that already exist in the financial world, but for a fair system you actually need to have decentralization. From analyzing these metrics and these blockchains that were considered in this index, it was very interesting to see a very strong performance for Cardano in most of the metrics, a very good performance for Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, as well as a surprising performance of Tezos that also showed a very interesting level of decentralization in these metrics, being second only to Cardano. However, I'm curious to know what is your opinion about the EDI and what do you think about all these metrics? Please drop it in the comments. And meanwhile, if you're concerned and worried about the funding principles of cryptocurrencies, such as decentralization, removing intermediaries, and empowering individuals financially, then you should definitely check the first episode of the podcast Chain Reaction, where we basically talk about stablecoins, the risks of stablecoins, and what stablecoins mean to the principles of crypto. And on my side, I'll see you there.